Matrix Resurrections is out in theaters now and on HBO Max. I have a spoiler-free review if you want to check that out and you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it and you're watching this video and you don't want to be spoiled, now is the time to cut and run. This is going to be a spoiler talk about The Matrix Resurrections. I have a lot to say about The Matrix Resurrections, and in my spoiler-free review, I said that this was the extreme high and the extreme low of the Matrix series. There's things in Resurrections that I liked, but to be quite frank with you, the more that I think about Resurrections, the less I think I actually like Resurrections. I didn't even like it all that much. I think that there's actually more negatives than there are positives. So let's talk about some major plot points and character decisions and story decisions within the Matrix Resurrections. So Resurrections opens up with a recreation of the opening scene of the original Matrix. And right then and there I said, this is not going to go well. It's the original scene where Trinity discovers the location of Neo, and agents that are part of the Matrix are coming after her. When we see this scene of Trinity from the perspective of a new character, Bugs, who's played by Jessica Henwick. Bugs was a character that I actually really liked. I thought that she actually brought some new life to the franchise. I like that she's in like an isolated modal of the Matrix. It's like running old code, so that's how she can actually witness this event. And luckily they don't recreate shot for shot the entire scene, but it did bother me that I was like, oh, well, this is just fan service baiting, and we'll talk more about fan service later. She gets a kick-ass action scene with her operator Zeke, and I really actually like that. It was just the thing here. Okay, I like the idea that they're in the Matrix in old Matrix code, like the original Matrix simulation, or from what we learned in the Matrix Reloaded. That scene that I praised in Reloaded with the architect, yeah, I fucking hate that scene now. It makes no sense. We find out that that's like the 6th version of the Matrix. So yeah, but I mean, it was cool to actually see a different perspective of that opening scene of the original Matrix, and it was cool to see it from Bugs' perspective. And then that leads into an action scene. It was weird because Trinity, I believe, is not played by Carrie-Anne Moss in that scene. If it was Carrie-Anne Moss, they used some de-aging technology and it did not look like her at all. And if it was her, that was jarring. The opening scene was a bit jarring for me, though, because Morpheus, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, is portrayed as an Agent Smith. And, okay, look, somebody needs to explain this whole Morpheus thing to me, because I really don't understand Morpheus in this movie. It was like the one thing in the movie that I was lost on. I guess this Agent Smith is an embodiment of Morpheus? And then Bugs breaks him free of his coding, and now he's like a newer version of Morpheus. I think that that's how the movie plays it off. But look, I have some questions. Okay, there's questions that this movie raises. Like, I understand what is happening. I understand why it's happening. Where I'm lost, I guess where I'm lost, like, I don't understand the what and the why with Morpheus. Everything else, I understand the what and the why, and the consequences that that could bring about. Everything else in the movie is that. The Morpheus thing, I'm completely lost on. I guess with the Morpheus thing and the other things in the movie that I understand the what and the why, it's more just logic. Because if this version of Morpheus is a different Morpheus than the Lawrence Fishburne Morpheus, at least I think that's what the movie's explaining to me. Okay, but if Bugs finds this new version of Morpheus in this old Matrix code, if Agent Smith was like the embodiment of Morpheus in the original Matrix code, like, I don't really understand how in the original Matrix then that's not a thing. Because if this is old code, then how is Agent Smith an embodiment of Morpheus? You know, it's just logic things like that really plague these Matrix sequels. I don't know, I could be looking too far into it. There's probably an explanation that I missed somewhere in this movie. But I was just lost on the whole Morpheus thing. I honestly didn't like the version of Morpheus portrayed in this movie, and that has nothing to do with Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. I prefer Lawrence Fishburne in the movie, and I think it would have been more beneficial for this movie if they brought both him and Hugo Weaving back as Smith. Their respective actors do what they can with the roles in this movie. It just felt weird. I was completely lost on the Morpheus thing. And then later on in the movie, I don't know, like it seems like he can, I don't want to say teleport because I don't think that's exactly what it was, but he's like made of like electronodes or something in the real world. And those electronodes like allow him to just pop up in certain spaces and enter different, the whole, somebody explain the Morpheus thing to me in the movie in the comments below. Can't really hark on it anymore because I don't know, like I'm just so confused with Morpheus in this movie. As I stated, it's the one thing in the movie where I don't understand the how and the why, and especially don't understand the logic. So after this opening scene, we are met up again with Thomas Anderson, and this actually is a good idea. Like, I like his idea that, like, maybe the original 3 movies were all a dream, and that Thomas Anderson, like Neo's actual identity, or supposed actual identity, he's a video game developer, and he actually created the world of the Matrix in 3 video games. Okay, let's talk about the fan service. Because this felt like fan service. Okay, this was meta. For sure. Like, it was self-referential, self-aware. And I get the movie at times, it's supposed to be a critique and satire about video game developers and studios and just how much control they actually have. Didn't work for me. I think that all that was handled pretty poorly. It worked in this scene as like saying, okay, like that it makes sense that I feel like Thomas Anderson would create a video game world based on dreams that he's having. And I like the idea that anytime he sees his therapist is suppressing those dreams and those visions that he's having of Trinity and the events of the Matrix by giving him blue pills, which immediately you know that something's up with the therapist. That's Neil Patrick Harris's character. We'll talk more about him later. So I like that idea. I thought that that was actually a great idea, and it expanded the world of the Matrix. It was able to explain how Neo came back, because Neo died at the end of Revolutions, and also Trinity died in Revolutions. It doesn't give a full-blown explanation, but it was enough that I needed. Okay, so that part was meta, and I was fine with that. But once it continued on, we kept seeing flashbacks of previous scenes in the movies, and then there's that whole scene where Bugs and Morpheus meet with Neo to explain to him what the Matrix is. It's essentially a recreation of the scene from the first movie where Morpheus explains to Neo what the Matrix is. You know, the red pill, blue pill scene. They do that again in Resurrections. It's just nowhere near as good, and what actually takes me out of the movie for a lot of these fan service moments, the brief flashbacks included where they use like footage from the previous movies, this scene especially, it got way too heavy-handed. Did not work for me at all, because you have archive footage of the original scene from the first Matrix playing in the background as the new scene where they're recreating that scene, not as well as they did in the original Matrix, is playing out as well. So you have 2 scenes that are doing the exact same thing. I get that that's part of the joke of the movie being meta, but it didn't work for me, and it's mostly because the original scene in the original Matrix was staged better, crafted better, and written better. This just feels haphazardly put together. Let's talk about the blue pills for a minute, because Neo's taking these to, or I guess at this point he's still Thomas Anderson, so he's taking these pills to suppress his dreams and separate his fantasy and his dreams and his visions from reality, but he stops taking that medication, and because of that, somebody's able to enter into his code of his game. But then this version of Smith, who definitely doesn't have the Mr. Anderson effect that Hugo Weaving did, and instead it's just like, Mr. Anderson! Mr. Anderson! everything that they try and do that connects to the original trilogy or tries to recreate things from the original trilogy is nowhere near as good as it was in the original trilogy, or at least the original movie. This is why I said it was beneficial, I think, that they brought Hugo Weaving back as Smith, that they brought Lawrence Fishburne back as Morpheus. Like, nothing against the two actors. I feel that I would have gotten more out of their characters if it was Lawrence Fishburne and Hugo Weaving. So we find out that Thomas actually like subconsciously like created this code so that Bugs and her gang who thought that Neo was dead could actually enter the Matrix at that specific time, and that allowed them to find Morpheus. I still don't know why was it that specific moment in the original Matrix though? Like, couldn't they have just gone into any other moment in the Matrix and just ripped and just found Morpheus? Like, these are the logical questions that I ask myself when I watch the Matrix sequels. Like, I don't have these questions when I watch the original Matrix. When it comes to Reloaded, especially Revolutions, and now Resurrections, I just think that they could have been handled better. And this is why, like, the more I think about the movie, the less I actually like it. So you have that with Neo, and then I think that's actually when he starts to believe them. And I think they do a recreation of the office chase from the original one. That's all this movie was. It was just recreating scenes for fan service's sake. I know I've gone off that topic now, but yeah, that's especially why that didn't work for me. And they find Neo, they tell him about the Matrix, and then we get a recreation of the training simulation from the original Matrix with Neo and Morpheus. Except now it's Keanu Reeves and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, and it's nowhere near as good again. They do something with Smith in this movie that I think is actually really interesting, but they don't do much with it, because we know in the original trilogy that Neo, we thought he died. We thought he killed Agent Smith at the end of the first one, but it turns out that he really only set him free, which isn't explained at all in Reloaded. But now in Reloaded and Revolution, Smith can assimilate people in the Matrix to be another Agent Smith. So he's assimilated the entire Matrix. That version of the Matrix is done. That was the idea of the original trilogy. This one is kind of like a swarm bug that Smith can do. Okay. I can buy that. Like, I like the expansion of lore. I like that we're doing something other than Smith assimilating people in the Matrix. I like that Smith is really like a secondary antagonist and feels somewhat like an ally to Neo at times. Okay, I can live with that. The swarm thing, cool. Just wish they did it more. There are ideas in this movie that are good, just poorly executed, and that's one of those ideas. And the visuals for it when it happens, and I get that the visuals are part of the meta joke. Again, critique and satire on how to make a modern movie in the studio system, but that never came across for me. It doesn't come across as well as Lana Wachowski thinks it does in the movie, to the point where the visuals are actually super, super distracting. So Bugs and her gang extract Neo from the Matrix, and I absolutely hate the way they exit the Matrix in this movie. They exit through mirrors. I thought the whole point was that they had to exit through like uses of telephones. I don't know, I guess it's because technology has updated now, so they're trying to update it for like a current era. I don't know, there's no explanation to that. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, and this is exactly why people aren't huge. Like, I'm glad the Matrix sequels get reappraisal, but this is a huge reason why many are not sold on many of the ideas in the Matrix sequels, because they raise more questions than they do answer. Okay, so they're out of the Matrix in this. There was this action scene on a train. I'll talk about the action soon. Okay, let's talk about the plot. So the plot revolves around Neo trying to get Trinity back. He finds out that Trinity is alive. In this iteration of the Matrix, she's living in the Matrix has a completely different identity named Tiffany. She's married, she has 3 kids, but in order to do so, Neo has to learn about the Matrix again, which I've already discussed in brief detail. There's something going on with Neil Patrick Harris's character, Sati from Revolutions Returns, that exile programming that found Neo on Mobile Avenue in Revolutions Returns, all grown up. Together, Trinity and Neo can actually take down the new threat. So let's talk about the new threat, and let's talk about where the story goes next. Because we get to this city called Io. We are no longer in Zion. This is like the next human sanctuary, and Jada Pinkett Smith returns as Niobe, which, again, logic. How old is Niobe supposed to be in the original trilogy? Like in her 30s? She's supposed to be probably, what, 60 years after the original trilogy. She's supposed to be what, like probably 95 years old? Okay, like I understand that people at 95 don't necessarily look like they were 95. My grandmother passed away in August at 94, and there was no way you could tell that she was 94. So a lot of people look a lot younger than they actually are, but the aging makeup on Jada Pinkett Smith was terrible. And if you're gonna recast Morpheus and Smith, like, what was the thinking behind bringing back Jada Pinkett Smith then? Like, wouldn't you think they would cast somebody older? Especially since we're that far into the future in the movies, and this is where Neo learns that he was resurrected. We don't really know how, and there's actually a really great scene at I forget exactly what point it's at, but it's a scene where he wakes up in the real world, in that pod that we know of from what the original Matrix told us. I love that scene where he actually sees Trinity in the pod across from him, and he's like trying to like reach out to her, but she's not waking up, and then the machines come and they take away Neo and they bring him to Bugs', I think they bring him to Bugs' gang. Like I said, it's still a little hazy because I've only seen it twice, but I think they bring him to Bugs' gang, and that's when they go to Io, and that's when Neo learns from Niobe that the peace treaty with the machines is still intact. Okay, I like that. Like, I like how after 60 years, they still have a mutual agreement and a mutual peace agreement, and they're actually working together. Good idea. Thought that worked really well in the film. And they're teaming up together to take down this new threat within the Matrix. Loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I thought that was established very well within the film. Okay, so now let's get to Neil Patrick Harris's character, who was the therapist. So a big crux of this plot, as Neo is trying to go and rescue Trinity, is that Neil Patrick Harris actually comes in after a brief fight between Neo and Agent Smith, and Agent Smith actually starts to help Neo briefly, because he's trying to fight against Neil Patrick Harris as well, who reveals himself to be TheAnalyst, who is essentially, he's the architect guy of this new version of the Matrix. Hated it. And it's mostly because I hate that scene with the architect in Reloaded. Even though I stated I liked it, I hate it now. The implication is that this is a new version of the Matrix, and the motivation for TheAnalyst, okay, him suppressing Neo's memories with the blue pills makes sense, because you know that there's something going on there. It makes sense story-wise that he is the creator of this new version of the Matrix. I don't like the idea, though, that TheAnalyst studies the human psyche. I'm cool with him resurrecting Neo and Trinity. But, like, why did he need Neo and Trinity to study the human psyche? I guess it's because Neo's the one, but there's just... can you study the human psyche? Like, if their bodies are dead? I guess not. But this is the Matrix. Like, you have so many different people as prisoners in these pods. You can use them. Like, what is the point of resurrecting Neo and Trinity? And I guess it's because the idea that the closer that Trinity and Neo get to each other, the more powerful they can become, and they can overpower TheAnalyst. Okay, it doesn't work. It's more of that philosophical bullshit that the Wachowskis beat over our heads in the original trilogy. So then we get to the climax of the movie, and this is one of the most anticlimactic third acts I've seen in a movie all year. The drive is there, the goal is there. Trinity's decision, I think, is very well done, but nothing sticks out from a visual effects, practical effects, just special effects in general, or an action standpoint, to the point where it comes across as really lazy and boring. And then she's able to break free, and Tiffany reassumes her identity as Trinity. And as Trinity and Neo, they become one, and now Trinity can learn to fly. And that went over my head. Look, I'm glad they actually gave Trinity something to do, because I think in Reloaded, and especially Revolutions, they did Trinity dirty. The entire thing's a philosophical metaphor for a love story. This is what I'm talking about with these movies. It's too much. And now it's saying the power of love conquers all. Good message, but I don't think we needed to take it as far as to Trinity flying. I think the idea of Trinity and Neo just being close to each other or being together to overpower the Analyst was enough. Didn't need to see her fly. And as much as I love Trinity, she's not only one of my favorite female sci-fi characters, she's one of my favorite sci-fi characters of all time. I just think they took it a little bit too far with that ending, and just how that connects to a giant metaphor for a love story. That's the movie in a nutshell. When it comes to the actual action scenes, though, here's how I equate them. Even though I'm very mixed to negative on both Reloaded and Revolutions, both of those movies, along with the first one, have sequences that stick out in my mind. Resurrections doesn't have that for me. I would say if I were to pick one, I would probably say the train sequence. That action scene is fairly well done. I don't know. It's just because the effects aren't that great. The shots felt very low budget. Because they're in slow-mo, it takes away from the impact and the tension of the actual action sequence itself, to the point where it comes across as if Lana Wachowski forgot how to direct action. And I understand that the argument is there that this is done on purpose because of how meta and referential this movie is, but I think at a point you have to move past that, and it didn't, and that made the action sequences really stale for me. So I don't really have a sequence like the lobby shooting spree, or the freeway chase, or Neo versus Smith in Revolutions as a standout action scene. And even though the Matrix sequels aren't that great to me, I feel like that's what they're known for. Those sequences are ingrained into my head forever. Nothing is gonna be ingrained in my head with Resurrections, and that's Resurrections in a nutshell. There are things that I liked. Those things that I like have something that springboard into something I don't like related to those things that I like. And the more I actually think about Resurrections, the less and less I like it, because of logic. Other than the Morpheus thing, it's not that I don't get it. It's that it's just things happen that raise more questions than they do answers. That was the biggest problem with Reloaded and Revolutions, and it's another big problem here. It's only heightened more because people are hoping that this is better than both Reloaded and Revolutions, and it's not. I would probably, I gave the movie a C. I would probably bring that down to a C- now, thinking about the movie more and just some logistical issues involving the story and decision making with some of the characters that didn't sit well with me. There's good ideas that weren't executed all that well. There were good ideas that I thought were executed well. I think the problem is that the meta stuff gets too heavy-handed. The entire story itself is a philosophical metaphor for a romance story. So that feels heavy-handed once again. It's the same problems that plagued the sequels. And I think what didn't help Lana Wachowski on this movie is that the co-writers of this film are people who study philosophy and have written books about philosophy. So, I think one of them wrote Cloud Atlas. So that immediately was a red flag. And it comes across a lot in this movie. More so when I saw it the second time and when I thought about it more as opposed to the first time, because I didn't catch up on it as much the first time. The second time, it was more blatant and more obvious. And and now the movie's frying my brain because now I'm thinking about things related to the plot that defy logic or that don't really use logic to its greatest capabilities. And now I think it's because Reloaded and Revolutions, because of how philosophical they were, forced me to look into the ideas that those movies were playing out, and I didn't buy them whatsoever. When you watch the Matrix sequels, it becomes like an obsession trying to think about some of the philosophy that's presented. And I think that that's exactly what happened again on rewatch with this movie. And it's why the meta references don't work, it's why the self-awareness doesn't work, and it's why the entire story as a whole doesn't really work. I mean, it's such a simple story, but you expand it to so many moving parts, just bring the entire thing down. So yeah, on rewatch, The Matrix Resurrections, not a huge fan of. It's a movie that I think I'm gonna like less on rewatch anyway. I mean, I have the first three, so I guess I kind of have to own it. I'm a completionist, even if it's bad. You know, I mean, it's gonna be interesting watching 4 movies back to back one day, but yeah, I mean, it got worse. I'm sorry. Like, and if the meta stuff works for you, more power to you. If this entire movie worked for you, more power to you. I just felt it was fan service for the sake of fan service and philosophical bullshit that plagued the sequels that was way too heavy-handed for the sake of philosophical bullshit. So if you have seen The Matrix Resurrections, or if you can explain to me that Morpheus thing that I sort of got, but am still really lost on, like the only thing in the movie I'm still lost on, explain it to me in the comments below. And if I missed anything that you wanted to talk about, definitely engage in the comments, or if I totally misunderstood something, because I think with movies like this, it's your own interpretation, even though it's pretty straightforward. Definitely correct me in the comments. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.